Fintech Chatter. Brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search.
Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where fintech leaders join usually Dexter for a chat. Today, I'm your host, Simon Lee from Patona. Today's guest is Dexter Cousins from Tier 1 People. Dexter is the founder of Tier 1 People, and you'll know him as the host of Fintech Chatter. But this episode, we're doing something a little bit different, and I'll be hosting the show and asking Dexter the questions. Dexter, welcome.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate you inviting me along to my own show.
Yeah, well, you know, as we've kind of talked about before, we've listened to you chat to many people over the last couple of years. And what I've really enjoyed about catching up with you is we always have these really kind of in-depth conversations about the market. And today's about getting your perspective on your business and what you think's happening in the fintech space.
Awesome. Look, I really appreciate the opportunity to do it. I've had so many listeners reach out and say, hey, when are you going to do an interview? So when you made the suggestion, yeah, it was, look, I kind of thought for once I'll have to get used to listening to my own voice.
As I said, it was actually something you've got that soothing voice, right? So so I'll try to get you talking more today. So just tell us a little bit about Tier 1 People and what does the business do?
Yeah, so we're an executive search firm that's focused exclusively on fintech. Launched the business in 2016, and we now serve businesses across the UK, Australia, Asia, so predominantly Singapore, bits of North America as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we're kind of probably about 50% of our clients are international businesses.
Really?
Do a lot of helping companies launch here in Oz. Not as much recently, but still happening. Kind of helping those businesses bring in talent from other regions as well. So,
interesting.
Known for helping the likes of Revolut launch here in Oz and some other big US and UK businesses.
And is that why you've been doing a lot of trips to Singapore over the years as well? Is because you're actually serving that market?
Yeah. So it's kind of I know the pandemic has got everybody to kind of hide in their bedrooms and kind of recruit from their undies. But I'm still a big proponent of you've got to meet clients and kind of build those relationships, and best way to do that is one-on-one, right, in person.
Yeah, well, thanks for having pants on today, mate.
That's all right. Yeah. Well, I'm in Melbourne, right, and it's nearly winter, so
exactly.
I'd be mad not to.
And tell me, what got you interested in focusing purely on fintech?
Yeah, great question. So I've been recruiting since the late 90s. Came to Oz in 2004, and had always been, I was actually one of the first digital recruiters in Australia. Yeah. So back then, product managers were known as producers, and so I was at the kind of forefront of mainly within digital marketing and creative. But that was probably one of the first proponents of where we'd seen shift from analog to digital.
Yeah.
And did that for a few years, just got fed up of recruiting for agencies, right? Because they're just such hard work, and went back into what I'd been doing previously, which was accounting and finance, predominantly for banks. Yeah. This was 2007, right? And end of 2007, beginning of 2008, and the GFC hit. Yeah. And I thought, I'm recruiting for banks. The clients I was working with were like Lehman's, Babcock and Brown, right? Yeah, Allco, right? They all went bust. Seen a big retreat from international banks, kind of leaving the Aussie market, and I was like, well, what? I've got to make money, otherwise I'm getting sacked. And at the time, I was on a 457 visa, so I was like, I don't want to go back to the UK. I best get my shit together, right? Yeah, find a way to make some money. Yeah. Fortuitously, at the time where the GFC was happening, Australia's big four banks were in a really strong position. Yeah. And they had struggled massively to bring in top talent prior to the GFC. So if I spoke to anybody who was kind of fit the profile of top talent. And he asked them the 3 places they'd want to work. In 2008, it was Macquarie, Babcock and Brown and Allco, right?
Yeah.
2009, 2 of those businesses were gone and Macquarie weren't hiring. So, also, I think what happened was people then started to view those as high-risk businesses and want to go somewhere that was a bit safer. At the same time, you had CBA in particular kind of take this big push of going digital. And so that kind of digital experience had lent itself well to then being able to help the, like the CBA and Westpac, etc. on this digital kind of innovation and strategy path that they were heading down. And I did that for a few years, and then kind of 2012, first kid, I'd always wanted to start my own business, but it was too big of a risk, and I wanted to join.
Funny we do it when we have kids, like the 2 toughest things.
Well, I didn't actually do it. I didn't actually do it at this point, but what I did do was join a much smaller organization where there was only me and 2 other people, and joined as a partner, and basically set up a banking and finance practice. What happened though is, it's a small business, with all my network being, these big, huge corporates. It's just really difficult. I'm sure you see this, right? Like trying to work with a large corporate.
To get in there and
get in there and then all that. And so I was forced again to kind of look at where the opportunities were.
Yeah.
And it was smaller businesses, right? We weren't even calling them startups in 2012.
Right.
And
well, fintech wasn't cool yet.
Yeah, it wasn't a thing, right?
It wasn't a name for it yet, right?
And so I started working with the likes of Virgin Money and a lot of these kind of smaller financial services businesses. But at the same time, was seeing what was happening in the UK as well, and kind of around about 2013 was probably the first time I heard the term fintech.
Yeah.
And so what really kind of resonated with me was working with these smaller businesses was just that they required a completely different type of person than what was required in a big bank. And so from a recruitment perspective, you were forced to really kind of solve quite complex problems and assess people based on their propensity to be able to get shit done, right? In a really fluid environment with no resources, and they just had to make things happen.
That's an interesting one though, right? Because that's what we often found when we were recruiting is you needed to get the skill sets there, but and you'd find the people with the skill sets inside the banks, but they didn't then have to get shit done attitude because they've been trained for no fault of their own, but 10 years you work in a bank, it's very different, right, than working in a small business where you have to get shit done, right?
Yeah.
And that finding those 2 mixes is very hard.
Yeah. And look, I just immediately kind of latched onto this. And I think one of the reasons why is that if I go back to my early career, I actually started out as a graphic designer.
Really?
Yeah. My dad had a publishing business.
And the black glasses.
Yeah. Look, my dad, I wasn't very good, right? That's how I ended up in recruitment. But my dad had a publishing business and I went to work with him and it was an absolute mess, right? He was like, I found out when I went and joined him that he'd actually been declared bankrupt. But look, it was such a formative kind of part of my life, and what I learned of dealing with the stresses and the pressures. And look, it was also really cool because the publishing business was all about go-karts, which sounds pretty boring, right? But the people that we were featuring were Jenson Button, Lewis Hamilton,
nice, really cool,
Fernando Alonso, right? Max Verstappen, his dad Jos, who was a Formula One. So there was all this kind of cool stuff, right, that I was kind of part of, but we did it all on the sniff of an oily rag, right? There's no money there.
Yeah.
And I think that was what opened my eyes and kind of gave me not the startup bug, but I'd just say that, small business, right? Like you just happen to make things happen, right? And the thrills and the champagne and razor blades, right? Like, like I just remember moments where it was do or die, right? Like you're going to have to shut down the business. And then all of a sudden you'd look at the bank account and somebody had paid an invoice that you'd been chasing for 12 months, right? It's like, you're like, wow, we live to fight another day. And that's, I think that was, those things all coming together was then around about 2015. I'd always wanted to start my own business, and I just was trying to get all my ducks in a row. And a bit like when you have kids, right? You never do. It's just like, just do it.
Yeah, you
just
got to make it
just
jump.
do it.
Yeah.
And it's there was a bit of a catalyst. I think that, the guy I was working for, I'd put together a whole business plan about we could see what was happening, right, with AI and everything that, there were going to be big changes, and put together a business plan to focus on fintech. And he was like, well, that's great. I think it's a good idea, but startups have got no money. So how are you going to bill like $1 million a year whilst, kind of doing this on the side? And I thought, well, why do it on the side and give half of it to you? I'll do it for myself.
And it's an interesting point, right? Because in 2015, there wasn't really investment happening into fintech in Australia.
Yeah.
So, as a fintech that launched in 2014, we had to go get funding in America, and we had to go live in St. Louis, and, 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment at 35 with a kid on the way, just to get some money, because it wasn't here. So you were pretty... to foresee that, right, that there was going to be that much money pumped into the market, because at that stage there wasn't. It was pretty ballsy.
And I think, we're kind of fast forwarding a bit, but we're now in a moment where, it's really tough for everybody. Pretty much everybody, right? It's the end of the cycle.
It's actually almost that GFC moment.
Yeah, it is, but it feels in some respects, I'm actually quite relieved.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds a really strange thing to say, but it's forcing us all to go back to the basics of, and that's actually, I think that's where the fulfillment of it lies. There's no fulfillment. Like, we're talking about our businesses, respective businesses, and how 12, 18 months ago we were getting slammed, right? And I was getting like 9 calls a week about shit like, a buy now, pay, a CTO for a buy now, pay later for school lunches, right? And you're like, right? And you're like, what? Like, and they got like 7 million seed money, right? You're like, how the right? It became so easy that it just made everybody got involved. There was no kind of, exclusivity. There was no qualifier of, hey, earn your stripes. These are the things that, the sacrifices you've got to make to earn that 7 million seed money. It was like people rocking up with just a pitch deck and a stupid idea, right? And
do you know what's crazy? We launched Assembly Payments with a total of $250,000.
Yeah.
We built a product that got to market and ran payments, right? Yeah. And then suddenly people going, I need $10 million to do that. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
So you need to pay yourself $300,000 a year straight away?
We taught the guys at Tyro, right? And it was like done with a couple of credit cards. Yeah. Right? And they had to pay for servers and all this other stuff, right?
We look, that's what we did. We paid it on our credit cards and worked for free. I got to the point where I had holes in my shoes because I couldn't afford to replace my shoes. Right. And literally was broke. Yeah. And then there was, and you saw this in 2020 and 2021, it was insane. Yeah. I actually think exactly what you said is, I got to the point and being in a fintech that needed to burn a lot of cash, and I couldn't do it anymore. And hence, why I went and did something like Patona is I just want a nice, easy, profitable, simple business. I call them dumb, stupid businesses, right? Is that they're not smart.
What's the saying? Revenue's vanity, profit is sanity.
Yeah.
And it always comes back to it, always comes back. And we were talking before about these cycles, and you mentioned the mini blip that we had 2012. And I remember hearing that term in 2012 from a client that was saying, revenue's vanity, profit is sanity, right? Yeah. So we kind of keep getting these reminders when there's too much exuberance that the market has a, nature or whatever it is, right, has a habit of kind of giving you a very not so subtle reminder of, you're not doing the basics.
Yeah, and in fact, I was kind of talking about that before. Is 2012 is what reminds me to be really frugal now. Is because I think I mentioned I wiped myself out and lost everything. Lost my house, lost my business, was $1 million in debt, and kind of stupidly the only thing I knew was how to start a business. I had to go do it again. Yeah. And thankfully this one worked out. Yeah. But, it's interesting on that. Like, where do you see this cycle going? I think you mentioned before, this is your 3rd or 4th cycle now?
Yeah, so I've recruited through, first one was the .com crash. So I was about 2 years into my recruitment career when that happened. Second one was the GFC. That one was probably the scariest one, I think, just because I was right in the eye of the storm. All of my clients, my network were investment banks, and they were the ones that were really impacted. But actually, reflecting on that, if you look, I think every time there is one of these events, initially we think that this wealth has been lost, but it's not. It gets transferred, right?
Yes.
The balance of power shifts, and what happened in 2008, 2009, the balance of power shifted from the banks to the tech firms.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing now is that, the next shift of power, I think, is going to go from the tech firms. It's actually going to come into the hands of the individual.
Yes. What why?
So if you look at what's happening with AI, right?
Yep.
And everybody's freaking about losing their jobs. And look, it's inevitable, right? There's going to be a lot of people who are going to find themselves less and less relevant.
Yes.
Within a corporate or a business structure.
Like what robots did to manufacture.
Right, yeah. But if you look at it the other way, right? Like we were talking before about the podcast and how I can do everything, and it's all in a little bag, and I can reach thousands of people.
Correct.
Right. And I can create a business, and I can market, and I can do all these things, and I don't need anybody else. Right. And you talk about, profitable businesses. I can have $1 million business a year, and I'm the only employee.
Well, that's interesting, right? So the same thing with Patona and probably with Tier 1 is we don't actually have any employees in Australia. We have 150 in India, but none here. And the same thing, I'm a terrible writer, but ChatGPT now means I don't need a content writer.
Yeah.
I've got a mate, I won't say who, they're quite a big company. They had 10 to 12 content writers until 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
They're going to 3.
Yeah, I don't know if you've checked your spam box, but mine's full of people offering content and copywriting services.
Because it's the first to be hit.
Yeah.
Development should be, from what we can tell, 25% more efficient.
Yeah.
Right. So that should mean that we either start to build more code, so we don't need as many developers, or we can start to build the things that were too expensive to fix. Right.
So my kind of prediction, I don't know if you've seen the movie about Facebook social network.
Yep.
And there's the line where it goes, $1 million isn't cool. It's cool as $1 billion. I think in the next few years, you're going to see the first $1 billion solo business.
It'll be interesting.
Right. So you look at like what, and I know Mr. Beast has got a crew, right? I truly think that, the power of technology, there is this, and everybody's freaking out about it, but I don't think they're looking at actually now, what are the opportunities that you've got? Now, I remember growing up in the north of England in the 80s, we had 25 to 30% unemployment in the region, right? And a lot of my kind of uncles, all had to go either to the Middle East, or work offshore 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
Correct.
To try and find work. They couldn't find anything locally. And if you didn't have those skills, right, you were screwed, right? There was no retail, everything was closing down. So proximity was everything. Whereas now you can be anywhere in the world, right? Anytime, and you can access like every single person on the planet pretty much.
Yeah. That's what I think is kind of like when you hear a lot in the legal industry going, it's the legal industry is going to be under threat and stuff like that. And they probably need to, because, $1,250 an hour is expensive, but only, less than 1% of the world can access a lawyer. So you look at it and go, with AI, everyone in the world is going to be able to access some form of legal advice. It'll write you an NDA, write you a contract and things, right? When I've looked at things, Mace was the founder of 99 Designs, Mark Harbottle. Everyone, when that launched, said, design's dead, agencies are dead. No, it made branding more important. And the digital agencies actually flourished from it. And I think things like that will happen with AI. As soon as people can access some services and they can use them, when they actually need a lawyer, they will use it because they can now access legal documents, and it won't mean the industry will die. It'll actually mean it'll grow.
Yeah. Look, I agree, but I think there is a challenge, right? And it's a societal one. It's probably a humanitarian challenge. Yeah. It's this kind of premise that it then creates us up to be more creative. Well, creativity doesn't come without sacrifice, right? And I think particularly since COVID, there's this level of kind of comfort. And it's almost like the whole world wants to hide in its bedroom, and not get out there and do stuff. It's kind of, there's almost like a sense of entitlement as well around, hey, look, I should be able to work from anywhere, and look, all of those things you should. But everything that you have in life is a contract, right? And it's an exchange, and it's
straight and
it is, right? It's like risk weighted as well. And I think, what I'm seeing a lot and I'm hearing a lot, particularly from, the candidate market, is they're expecting the employer to take on all of the risk whilst they get all the upside. And no relationship works in that way.
Because there's not the kind of weighting of the value exchange at the moment. There's not completely one way last year, and there's still that expectation, and it hasn't rebalanced yet. I've definitely seen that as well. The other thing is that sitting at home in a dark room, as much as they want to do it, you see a productivity drop off if they're not actually getting back in the office. Have you noticed that?
Oh, look, I've been putting out this message for 2.5 years on LinkedIn, right? And it's always met with a lot of resistance. All by, I would say, I've never had a single leader, CEO, right, founder, or somebody who's got absolute skin in the game say, no, you're wrong. Everybody who's resisted is being paid a salaried job in an organization, right? So they're kind of not wearing the risk. And their view is, hey, well, I'm more productive because I don't have to travel. But that individual productivity is not translating into organization-wide productivity. That has gone absolutely. There was an immediate uplift.
There was,
I think,
because everyone worked really hard.
Yeah, but I think there were two things for that, right? The immediate uplift in productivity was what were you measuring it against? Businesses were just measuring whether they could actually operate still.
Yes.
Right. And now the expectation has moved from, it's not just about BAU anymore. We actually have these things that we need to accomplish. We have to improve. We have to get better. And this is where the productivity's gone down, because in order to improve things, you have to have collaboration, you have to have togetherness, you have to have solidarity, you have to have everybody or the majority of people on the same page.
But also it's a mental, I need to come into the office just to get kind of reinvigorated and talk about stuff and get pumped up.
Well, there's a lot of research out there that existed way before COVID around the impacts of things like video communication, and how it's 80% less effective than one-to-one communication. And also isolation and the impacts that has on people's mental health. Now, I think if it's not hard to go and dig up what's happening mental health wise. It's like where we are as society wise, it is, right? Yeah. It's like teen suicides are the highest they've ever been. There's we've still got social media, but then we've got all of this, one of the escapes that we had was going to work, right? Being around a group of people, right? And that kind of community feel. We don't have communities where we live anymore, so the only community that you had was the group of people that you'd come to with work. And now that's been taken away as well. It kind of doesn't surprise me that we're having all these mental health issues.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the backlash against it last year. I'm really good mates with a guy, Adam Schrobb, the founder of Escapes, and he actually posted saying, if you don't get back in the office, there's no reason your jobs can't go offshore, so you need it. And there was a big uproar. People gave him hate mail and everything.
It stands to reason, right? I was on, I think, Ausbiz TV a couple of years ago, and I said exactly the same thing, right? It's like, here's what's happening. And it was happening, right? It's like jobs were even being brought back onshore so that they could train the AI.
Right?
Yes. Right? And it's, and the reality is, right, that job's not going offshore again, so there's no chance of it coming back onshore. That job is gone forever.
Yeah, or it's going to be different, right? Like, say, content writing is a good example. Is you're going to feed your AI information and you're going to read the article and edit it, but you're going to be able to pump out 10 times more content than you used to be able to. So there's not going to be as many content jobs anymore.
Well, and this is then, I guess, the other thing, right? Is like, what happens to the quality of content? Because, we're already seeing that the cost of producing bullshit now is zero, right? But there was something actually the other day I read about a guy in the US, a lawyer, who used ChatGPT for a defense case, and it brought up all these cases that didn't actually exist.
Really?
And he used that as defense. And then got pulled up and had to blame ChatGPT, right? The cost of producing bullshit might now have gone to zero, but the cost of dealing with it hasn't. And I think this is kind of where, if the analogy I would give is, remember like when we were growing up, right? Like the whole thing around food was make it instant, right?
Yeah.
Zero nutrition, zero taste, but you could stick it in a microwave for 30 seconds and that was the craze, right?
And in UK, you'd walk into supermarkets and literally
it was like no fresh food, right? No fresh food at all, right? And we've seen a big backlash against that because we know that it's unhealthy for us, right?
Yes.
And if you look at things like coffee, I used to drink instant coffee all the time in the UK, and then I moved to Oz and tasted what real coffee was like, where barista takes their time, grinds the beans. You've got to wait for the drips to come out of the machine, right?
But you've got to do that.
Right. And like a few minutes later, and $4 later, you get that coffee, right?
That's a good one.
You go, that was worth waiting for.
Yeah.
Whereas the instant stuff, you're like, fuck, you know what? Like I'll not even drink coffee, right? Like it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we're going to see with AI in content. We've seen this pattern, right? Like music's a really good example of my kids are 12 and 10. They keep listening to the stuff that I grew up with over the stuff that's out now, right? Because it's so formulaic, it's all digital. Yeah. There's like, it's all processed, it's all,
it's kind of
not. There's no organic, there's no kind of happy accidents. Like everything's kind of meticulous and perfect and done to a formula. And therefore you can't distinguish.
Or you might like it for a month, but you don't listen to it forever, right? Like Fleetwood Mac or something like that.
But look, it's like, and I think this, at the end of the day, we're humans, right? Like we're not machines, and so the things that are going to resonate with us are going to be organic, not digital, right? Like, and I think this is where the kind of whole thing around AI is, becomes the enabler to do things at scale, right? Correct. And to kind of take away the kind of banal.
True. I think though, just on the AI piece, like what I've seen is, every single developer, and if they say they aren't, they're lying, was already going to Google, finding the code snippets they needed to write the function and then hitting it. So all that AI is doing for developers right now is it's speeding up that Google search process for them, right?
Yeah, look, it's true, right? I mean, ChatGPT is just basically cut and paste of, stuff on the web. Yeah. So it's no different to Google, right? And it just puts it's still the same bullshit that you would get, and this is, I think, where the issues are coming is that, we look at the web as an authority on truth. When it's not, right? It's like it's unregulated mess of just, lies and bullshit and truth and everything else.
I think that's going to eventually then they're going to try and give trust scores to sites to try and help.
Look at what's happened with Google, right? Like it's not based on quality, it's based on keywords.
But you find that now though, like you have to read 5 or 6 news articles to get and make your own decision. You can't because once upon a time you'd go and read the paper and go, oh yeah, that's what's happening. And now you go, okay, now I'll read BBC, I'll read this, I'll read the Australian, I'll read this, and then once I've got 5 points of information, I'll make my own decision about it now. Right?
Yeah,
we're in an information kind of overload.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, it's not just information overload, it's also like a lack of trust.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, who can I trust? Like, what source do I trust? Yeah. Where do I go, right? And I think when you get to that point, that saturation point, people naturally will just switch off.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be one of the challenges, for founders, is that, kind of, and we've seen this, right? Like if you look at VC and their hypothesis, for their bets to play off, we all have to be sitting in our bedrooms, never entering the outside world, getting everything delivered by milk run, right? Like VCing each other and like just not having any contact, right? Like it's a hypothesis that is like a dystopian world, right?
It is.
And it's kind of, it seems crazy that, right? Like, surely you want to be creating a better world, not a...
We're actually doing that at the beach or on holiday countries, and we're so one thing I want to go back to, and just on the working in the office and remote thing, and you probably get across a lot of companies, but there's another point that my good friend Adam Schwab said to me, is that by the people that he got back into the office, his staff churn was 20% of the people that still worked remote. So, for example, he'd have if he lost 8 out of 100 people, 10 out of 100 people over a year, people that are in the office, he lost 2 out of 100.
Yeah.
Have you seen stuff like that in other businesses?
It feels quite kind of in line with what we've had shared. So the people that have left, they've left because they couldn't work remotely.
Yeah.
And they went somewhere else.
Right.
And now here's something that's interesting, is that around about 30% of people who've left with the clients that we interviewed wanted to come back after about 3 months.
Interesting, yeah. I've actually had that in Patona.
And look, the bringing back to the office, it hasn't been 5 days. It's been, hey, look, we've got a hybrid model.
Yeah.
Predominantly, it's been about 3 days a week. Most of them have been set days because we're all back together, right?
Yeah.
So you all know when you got to come in, and that hasn't worked for some people, and they've left, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool. But I think what they have found is that the kind of levels of productivity have started to get back up again since they've gone to hybrid working and had dedicated days, because the collaboration's up. But also, look, this is kind of
a whiteboard.
You can't, right? But like, this is kind of also, I think, it's unspoken, but it's something that it comes out certainly from the talent that we work with, right? And like when they're asking, they don't want. We actually found over the last 12 months, people have been asking, is it remote only? Because I don't want to work in a remote only.
Especially younger people.
Yeah. But even older people, right? Like particularly leaders, they're like, I can't lead remotely, right? Like, and it's. I think this has been one of the really interesting kind of things that are oversights of the whole work from home. How many leaders have been given the development and training to be able to lead remotely, right?
Yeah. The other thing I've noticed is if you get people together more often and they get to chat and be close to each other and bond, there's less conflicts.
Yeah.
And if they're remote, there's that you constantly feel like a kindergarten teacher getting and doing conflict resolution because they're not bonding.
This is this is the unspoken rule, right? Like, and I think everybody this will resonate with.
Yeah.
I think nothing destroys a culture and morale in a workplace than when people take the piss and get away with it.
Yes.
And we all know that there are people who have completely taken the piss.
Yes.
Working from home.
Yeah.
Which means that those who are trustworthy and are working
get frustrated,
right? And they're usually the best performers.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that leave.
Yeah,
because if it's not dealt with, well, why am I busting my chops?
Or as a team, we're not performing as we could have because such and such isn't delivering, and they get frustrated because they want to deliver and be a high performance team. Yeah.
In an office environment, those dynamics would work themselves out. And I think one of the other things, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've been really fortunate in my career. I've worked with some of the best in the industry, right?
Yeah.
And I'd go and start a new job and I'd walk in, and on your first day you'd be like, I'm going to raise, I've got to step up 2 gears, right? Just to keep up pace.
Yeah, and that feels good though, right?
Yeah. And then you're like, what, right? Yeah. And then you're sitting here and you're there in the first few weeks and you're hearing people next to you and they're like saying something or they're dealing with a situation and we're like, oh, wow. That's all lost. It's all gone.
Yes. And that competition inside of work is develops people.
High performance businesses, right? Which is, I've been really fortunate at the businesses I've worked in. We've always been top 3 performing offices in the whole globe, right? In the organizations I've worked for. And that is the thing that's always been there, has been this kind of camaraderie, but this competition, right? We'd back each other up. But it was I wanted to be top of that leaderboard. Yeah. Right? Yeah. As long as you were kind of doing it ethically.
Yes.
Right? It was
you make it as a bit of fun. Yeah. Too. It's a bit of fun, competition, right? Yeah. Depending on the roles too, right? On what people are doing inside an organisation. Yeah. But it's a bit of fun to go, okay, if you're a sales guy, you want to compete in sales. Yeah. Or if you're, if you're in a development space, it's probably solving and working on the biggest problems, right? Yeah. Getting excited together and talk about geeking out onto how to solve those problems is really, what do we get into tech for? What do we get into fintech for? It's to help people solve problems.
Yeah.
right? Why do you do what you do? It's to help people solve problems, which is find talent, which grows teams, right?
Well, thanks for listening, folks. That was part 1 of the special interview between Simon Lee and myself. If you're interested in hearing the second part, where I talk about hiring in a lot more depth, as well as sharing some of my thoughts and insights on the current market and what it means not only for businesses but for our careers as well, then you can check that out by following us on your favorite podcast player. And if you do, please remember to give us a like and a share. It really helps us in spreading the good word. Until the next episode, keep well. Tier 1 people, leaders in executive search for fintech and the digital economy. We'll help you bring in world-changing leadership talent to build world-changing ventures. And you can find us at tier1people.com.